Yes, Leif here, live, episode 4 of the Life with Leif podcast. In this podcast, we are exploring transformational conversations with incredible people that have inspired me on their path, people that have allowed me just to understand a bit more about myself as well. And so today's guest is Arktara Rose. She is a sacred sexuality practitioner who is based in Ibiza. We met through mutual friends and we just really synced up. You know, she's a really beautiful woman. She's a queen. She's a goddess. She brings through her medicine. She brings through her codes. And we're going to be dropping in, exploring all different things in relationship to sacred sexuality. Like, what even is that? You know, something that's really new in my life. I'm going to speak to a bit more about my experience with these things as well, and sexuality in my life, and actually my relationship with sexuality and what that journey has been for me. And so we're just waiting now for her to check in live. But hey, if you haven't checked out any of the other episodes, we've had 3 incredible guests so far. Nigel, we spoke about men's work and all the different things that happen and what brotherhood is. Sophia Arktara, who is based in Mexico City, is an incredible practitioner, and she brought through a lot of her own medicine woman, shamanic medicine, in which is so beautiful. She's such a powerful queen. And also most recently we had Nico Bear, who is also a men's work practitioner but also a lifestyle coach, and drops in and allows people to both optimize their mind, optimize their body, and he is based in Ibiza. So those are the 3 episodes that we've had so far. And so right now I'm here, we're going to have episode 4, Arktara Rose, and we allow these conversations to really flow. And if you've had the time to check into any of the conversations before, I'd really appreciate you reaching out. I'd really appreciate you just checking in with me and being like, hey Leif, like this made me think this, or this conversation you had with this person was really interesting, or actually I found it really triggering and actually it was really frustrating, and would you be open to speaking around this topic? And so, you know, this is a new venture of mine as just a way to keep me tuned in to not only building the conversations that I have with people, continuing to build my relationship with people, as well as inviting myself to, you know, learn more about people that are in my life. Because at the end of the day, we all meet incredible people. We all meet beautiful people. I'm here just waiting for Arktara just to drop into this Instagram live space. And hello to everyone who is joining. And Arktara has just landed in this building. Hey Arktara, beautiful to see you. Yeah, really good. So welcome. As mentioned, you know, this is episode 4, and the question that we supposedly are going to answer, or at least dance around, is what makes sex sacred? And we'll kind of speak to that. But firstly, Arktara, would you be able just to introducing yourself and just telling us a bit more about who you are and why you're here?
Thank you for having me, firstly. Yes, I am a practitioner. I am a facilitator. I really base a lot of my work from my heart. I love to bring people together. I love to create transformation. And that looks like, for me, weaving sacred sexuality, tantra, practices with cacao also is something I'm really focusing on. And in that can be a mixture of breath work and sound and many different ways that allow us to drop the veil of who we are on the outside world and allow that connection to our self, to our uniqueness, to our authenticity.
It's beautiful. So if I was to walk into a library and pick up a book that said Tantra for Dummies, you know, what would that look like, you know, as a practitioner in the space? And, you know, for many people, it's a foreign word still. And, you know, I'm part of circles where people are speaking to it, but hey, you know, if I was to say, hey, Arktara, what is Tantra for Dummies? And maybe we can just start there, and then also you can just speak to that. And also what led you into that?
Firstly, I wonder if that book even exists. I'm curious now. Yeah, maybe I need to propose
maybe
to
that's
them.
it.
So yeah, I think when we speak of Tantra, there is such a variety of perceptions, of lineages, of different ideas. And I guess my own way of approaching Tantra, I actually don't call myself a Tantra teacher. I feel like I work with intimacy, and that can cover sacred sexuality, that can cover elements of Tantra. But I'm not like a purist, one lineage facilitator. So for me, the essence of what Tantra is in my world, in my understanding, in my way of sharing, is coming to connection from presence. Like presence is a really key word. Being able to bring the fullness of ourselves to an intimate experience, and whether that be intimacy through sensuality, through friendship, through spoken word, through intimate connection, sexual connection, coming with the fullness of ourselves and allowing ourselves to fall in love with that person for that brief moment, without the idea of like it's too scary to be in love and it's too soon to show these emotions, and bringing and creating spaces for people to bring that true expression of themselves. I think Tantra is a lot about, firstly, finding out who we are. And a lot of the practices are solo practices. You know, Tantra is often misconstrued into being about sexual connection with others. But actually, for me, the very beginning part of my Tantra journey was a lot about solo practice. I was chosen celibate during that time, or during part of that time. And understanding how my body worked, how I can move energy through my own system, how I can start to identify what my desires are, how to express boundaries. All of that is a lot to do with self, which I think then we open up to connect with others and are able to bring them into our world and into intimacy with a lot more clarity.
That's so beautiful. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And what's coming up for me is, I spent many years as a very unconscious lover, and I've got many men that I know in my circle who have also spent many years as a very unconscious lover, and actually from quite a wounded place have been making love. And that also means making love with the self. And that doesn't necessarily mean things like masturbation. What does self-love look like? And how can tantric practices inspire us to be more profound self-lovers? And so from what I'm hearing, it's like Tantra isn't necessarily all about how do I make love in a way to other people. And I think people can be quite misled. And I'm naming that for myself. Let me rephrase that. I can be quite misled when I was exploring tantric practices, and I thought, oh, it's all about, my lovemaking, what happens in the bedroom. But actually, it's about this relationship, which you've mentioned, with ourselves, this presence, and actually filling ourselves up, and that then being the place in which we fuel the fire, whatever that fire is for us, whatever the desire to have that fire, and wherever that leads us. But it's about how we fuel that fire. And so you kind of mentioned briefly about tantric spaces. And would you be open just to kind of sharing, like, what is that? What is a tantric space, and what might that look like for a man who is exploring different forms of understanding how they can love ourselves deeper, how we can love ourselves deeper?
Tantric space can be a whole variety of things. It can be your bathtub, it could be your bedroom, it could be going to a big workshop or retreat or festival, or it could be, in bed with your lover, or, everything in between that space. And I think when we want to create a space of self-love or a space of connection with intimacy, what I feel is really important to create that tantric bubble, to create that tantric space in whatever physical location you find yourself, is coming, again, back into presence with yourself, having really clear communication with your intentions with that person, if you are with another person, and having it as a sacred space. And when I say sacred space, I mean we're turning our phones off, we're putting nice music on, we are understanding that in this space we can really have a transcendental experience with God. That's the possibilities of what we can create in that. And again, this is where we're either with ourselves or with another, but having that union, whether it be internal or external, with something that is greater than us, that is something greater than pornography and I call it fast food sex, you know, sex that kind of like fills you up in that moment, but like leaves you feeling pretty empty afterwards, rather than this like sacredness of sex. And yeah, I feel that when we are creating a space of you know, distractions, presence, intention, um, there's a lot of scope for expansion and for having those really like divine experiences.
That's so beautiful. And two words there that really stick out for me is presence and intention. When you speak about sacred space, you know, when someone says sacred space, for us, an individual who may be not familiar with certain practices, like sacred, like sounds like such a far-fetched concept, or sacred sounds like biblical or religious in a way. But it's like, you know, from what we're sharing here, like sacred is about having clear intention and having presence. You know, our life can be acts of sacred practice just by being here now, you know, and actually that's sacred. And like that's like the juicy beauty part of life, is where sacred as a word which could be misunderstood, it's like, actually, let's just have presence in this moment, let's have intention. And I know, as a man that has, you know, had sexual relationships and at times found myself like not present at all, you know, the mind is somewhere else. You know, that you're thinking about, you're trying to get somewhere firstly, which is the opposite of presence. You know, oh, I'm having sex with a woman, so let me just climax. Oh, wow, you know, now that's happened, and now the moment has completely shifted. And you know, I'm not to speak on behalf of men, and only from my own experience, like a lot of my life, like that was it. You know, it was like, I'm gonna have sex because I want to ejaculate, and my relationship with this woman, it has a clear intention, and that is just to please myself. But actually what I'm hearing is, when you weave tantric practices into this and you start to understand having presence and intention to not only change your relationship with yourself, but also change your relationship with your partner and with your lover, and fundamentally becomes a prayer. And I think we're going to speak to that word as well in a minute, because that word, you know, can have connotations. But let's speak to, actually, you know, what is prayer, and what does that mean when I say the word prayer? Because, you know, an old programming is, I think of prayer and I'm there with my hands like this, sat in a massive church building, you know, reading the God's prayer. And that's prayer. That was it. Oh, that praying. Well, what's that? That's just us, you know, going like this and saying, "Oh, my Lord." Actually, you know, I think prayer is more than that. Would you agree?
Think, you know, talking about prayer and also talking about intention, they're very similar. I think they walk hand in hand together. And I think having prayer, having a desire for something to be greater than or more than we can see. You know, maybe there is this connotation of religion, and that's part of it, and spirituality, which, you know, is part of Tantra, can become part of that. And I definitely had a lot of programming. I was brought up in a Christian family, and had a lot of, as I started to come into my spiritual journey, people were talking about God and prayer, and I was just like, this isn't why. I did this, and I said no, you know? And so then as I started to reframe that and reprogram that, of like God not being this like religious idol, it being nature, it being the world around us, it being the knowing that there is something that is a greater energy than what we possess in our own physical bodies. And I think that's the same with prayer, like knowing that when we speak words that come from our heart, that come with presence, knowing that these words have the power to change our lives. And I think when we come to intimacy and sexuality with that energy of knowing that this experience with another person can change our lives. It's not this like we were talking about, this unconscious way of being. It's this making, in every moment that you're choosing to be with that person, making that choice to be with them and be with them in the fullness of your expression and your capabilities in that moment. So yeah. Prayer is magic. Prayer is manifestation. It's affirmation. It's all of those things.
That's so beautiful. No, thank you so much for sharing that. And it's, what's coming up for me is this like idea that, you know, we spoke to sacredness and how that's presence and intention, and the relationship between that and prayer. And fundamentally, like, our
when we
whole
choose it
life
to
is a
be.
prayer,
Yeah.
you know, by the way we, yeah, and that is such a
Hmm.
powerful thing, isn't it? Choice. Like, let's choose. How do we choose, and what decisions do we make that allow us to move closer
Hmm.
to the divinity, to the divine? And I guess once again, I feel like even there's connotations around divinity and divine and God, and you know, as a woman that you just shared that you've come from a Christian background as well, and like that has its charges, right? Like the relationship. And even I, as a young boy, grew up very young, but actually knew my mother is, I call her a chrislin, because she prays most
Mm.
days but goes to church on Sunday. And I say, what is that, mum? She's like, well, there's divinity, there's holy, and actually all of these things are interrelated. But actually, religion can be used in ways that maybe are less progressive. But I feel like that's a conversation
Park that one.
for another time. So, reeling, yeah, park that one.
Mm.
So kind of really reeling this idea of like what makes sex sacred, and something that's coming up for me, and that I'd love to speak to you about. And
Yeah.
it's a big part of how our relationship started, was this
Hmm.
idea of temple spaces, and I'm actually just going to go dot 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 and just allow you to kind of speak to that, like, and if it feels right, I'll share my own temple experience, as my first experience quite recently in a space of sacred sexuality. And yeah, it was, it was profound in different lights. But how important are temple spaces, and what is a temple
um,
space?
yeah, temple space in the tantric way, in the tantric teachings, is a space where many, many years ago, many thousands of years ago, there were priestesses, and the priestesses held this energy, this transformational energy that was including sexual energy. So when soldiers had been out to war, they would come to the priestess temple. They would kind of offload all of the heaviness from war through transformational sexuality. So this is like the history of where temples
Wow.
came from. And I feel like now, in these times where Tantra is becoming more accessible, we are seeing the fires igniting again around the world in different places through different Tantra schools and teachings, and temples are coming back again. So temples for me is a space where people can be free. It's a space where people can connect with themselves and with others. It's a space where there is potentially sensuality, sexuality, energetic practices, some of which may be something new, especially for people coming in. And maybe this is where you can share your experience when we get to that point. And there is very often, and I speak for the temple spaces that I'm creating and those of which that resonate with me, there will always be a opening ceremony or an opening circle where we talk a lot about consent and boundaries, and how to navigate spaces of sexuality and sensuality without taking someone else's no personally, and without crossing your own boundaries, because this is something that can be quite challenging when we're going into these spaces. It's like, oh my God, there's like infinite possibilities of what I can do in this space, and an excitement and a fastness of the energy, of wanting to experience. But actually, what we want to do is the opposite of that, is like slow down. We want to really feel and check in with our bodies and see where the temple energy wants to move us. And that's why having very clear boundaries of what we do want to experience and what we don't want to experience is so vital. So having that opening circle where we're giving participants tools to express both verbally and non-verbally, so they feel safe. As a facilitator, my biggest intention amongst everything that we're doing is creating a space that feels safe. And safe is different from one person to another. People come in with their own traumas, their own beliefs, and as a facilitator, we can't know that. So it's our responsibility to put in as many simple, practical, easy to understand protocols and practices so people can come in and have that freedom of expression. If we're feeling in our body unsafe and we're feeling we're holding ourselves, we can't then have that expansive, connected experience that we are desiring from going into a space of sexual freedom and liberation.
So beautifully put. Wow, so beautifully put. Thank you. Wow. And those spaces for me, from my experience, were completely different to anything I've experienced in my life. And I'm a man that facilitates lots of forms of men's work and those that identify as male in circle. But hey, you add tantric elements and those that identify as women into the space, the energy, the shift, the difference in those spaces
Yeah.
is profound, absolutely profound. And so, and being completely honest, I'm a man that is willing to meet my edge. But I was walking to the temple like, if I turned around now, I'd be completely fine. I've made it this far. I've committed to it. It's been a great journey in my own mind. If I was to just turn around, like, that'd be fine. Yeah, I arrived and I dropped in, and I was very fortunate to know some of the practitioners, which instantaneously made me feel very safe. And I think that was really, really important, because if you're going into a space and the idea of the space is to remove the masks in which you have in order to move closer to your sense of self, feeling safe and having trust is non-negotiable. It's the most important thing, right? And to have a temple experience where witnessing the expression of so many people, and I walked in with judgments, not only judgments of myself, but judgments of others. I was watching my mind walk into a space and make immediate judgments. And actually, I had to really check in with myself, because I was like, who are you to judge the people in this room right now? And fundamentally, this is your medicine, right? This is your medicine. And so, pardon me, throughout the practice, different things happen, as you know, and different types of processes unfold. But witnessing my own shadows come up around, like, nervous attachment, around ownership, and there was interactions I had with people, and suddenly, like, this inner child in me was like, oh, I'm getting jealous now, because what I'm witnessing is someone, and I was like, who am I to get jealous over just something in which has just happened with someone that I've just met, and like witnessing that inside of me? And I think what I really enjoyed about this specific space, because I'm sure like different practitioners weave them differently, is like the clear definition between, this is what happens in this area, this is what happens in this area, and this is what happens in this area. And this is an area where you can just drop into yourself. This is an area where you can pray by the altar, and that praying might just be being still, bearing witness to what is happening. And that's a beautiful practice as well, isn't it? Like, I recognized there was parts of me that was like, I need to get involved, let's get stuck in. And then at times I was out of that like intimate involvement, and then I was like, oh, I've been left out. I was like, whoa, like all this stuff coming up for me. And actually the practitioners beautifully held it in a way that meant that, there was different processes that happened that allowed people just to check in with each other, have conscious communication. But fundamentally, and I'll name it here, I had one of the most profound, intimate experiences that I've ever had in my life.
And
in
this
the
is the
temple
exact
experience.
reason why we have temple.
And like, and it completely blew me away. Yet I have to name, my heart was like expansive, open. It was like like real feels, like in my feels with these other people, and witnessing what came up for them and the connection, and how quickly as well. And you might be able to speak to this. How quickly you can go from stranger, that idea of stranger, when fundamentally we're all connected in some way, shape, or form, to deep intimacy in such a short space of time, feel connection, and then have that connection parked a bit, because that's how I felt. I was, oh, it's over now. I was there like, what, it's over? Like, I'm here, and actually then watching what comes up for me, and that you may want to kind of just sprinkle onto that, like the power of temple spaces, but what kind of happens in these spaces and how those emotions can come up for people.
I think what you bring is really important, is like what happens in the space is for potentially that brief moment, and maybe possibly there might be something that comes of that afterwards, but it's really a lesson of, again, coming back to presence. Like, I feel like we keep coming back to this word of like, I'm going to really open myself up, for whether that be emotionally, physically, intimately, and I'm going to have this expression and this connection with this person, and then it's gone. Like, how do we as humans deal with that? Like, what can we, if that is the totality of that experience, like, what can we then take from that into our everyday lives? I feel like these spaces are not just transformation of having that experience in that moment. It's then how we can use that medicine and like take it. And I think when we have these like heart open, like expression explosions almost, of beauty and intimacy, there is something that's identified in our everyday lives of like, I want more of that. Like, this is what I've been craving, this is what I've been looking for, this is what I'm asking for. Like, thank you, God, this is what I'm asking for, and like, how can then we recreate that in our everyday lives, in our intimate connections that we have outside temple that might have more longevity, or it might not. But how can we bring that out of temple? And I think once we have that experience, we start to understand. I'm going to speak a little bit about you, perhaps. So like, this is the beginning of this journey for you, like, and you've had this experience and you're starting to see what's possible, so then, like, what practices can I bring into my life that mean when I meet someone, I can access that again? Like, how do I clear my energy field? How can I work on my breath work that I know that can continue to let go of some of the protection I've got around my heart, as an example? And I think these are what these experiences can bring us, is this little like clicks, of like, okay, let's see what else is there. And like this curiosity, this openness to see what else is possible.
Absolutely. Is there a risk of becoming like a temple addict?
Yeah.
Because what I'm just going to speak to that, because there's, because
Yeah.
we're about clearing shadow, right? And bringing shadow into the light, wherever the work is, there's themes, and where's the line? And maybe this is like a bit of a contentious question. Where's the line between someone being like, yeah, I'm just going to go to temple, and that's kind of where I'm intimate, and then the balance between what does building healthy relationships outside of that space look like? Because if I'm able to go to a space and take masks off, how important then is that medicine, and how question mark do we avoid, or what's the right word, not necessarily avoid, but take the lessons and then take them to the rest of our life? Because after I experienced it, it was a bit like a psychedelic ceremony. You can get caught up in this, like, that was amazing, that was great, sign me up for the next one. And it's like, well,
exactly.
let's just take a moment to just like
That's
integrate
exactly what I was
and just slow down and take the lessons. Yeah, jump on that. So how important is that?
And I think likening it to a psychedelic experience is really key, because when we have these openings through plant medicine, as an example, and then we're like, okay, I've had the answers to my life, like, I want more of that. So then we sign up to the next plant medicine retreat, we sign up to the next transformational breathwork practice, we sign up to the next temple. And I think the key for all of this, and it covers all of these like really huge transformational experiences, is it comes back down to integration. And like you said, we're taking the masks off and meeting people with authenticity. But what's then stopping us from having that mask back on is like, okay, now I just want to connect in temples because this is the easy way of having these deep experiences, because we're taking away the everyday life and triggers and everything else that comes with intimate relating in a relationship style. So yeah, I feel like having space in between. I feel like journaling is always a really key practice. I feel taking time to be outside in nature and to really like let all of those codes, all of that medicine that we receive, to sink in. And this also like applies to being back in temple. Like, if and when we choose to go back into temple, it has the potential to be a completely different experience. Like, it's never the same. Whether I'm facilitating or whether I'm going as a participant, there's never the temples are never the same. And sometimes I've had experiences where I go and I'm like, okay, it's going to be like this, and it's not. And then there's this surrender of like, I am not the one that's guiding this energy. You know, this is the space that's been created, and the grounding that we've put in for this space, and it takes over. And I think if you get this into this point of addiction of like trying to recreate these experiences, this is when you're going to start to have other things come up in the space potentially. You know, we're going to come into that more shadow space potentially, and it's not going to be this like open, heart open, light, fluffy, you know, experience. We're going to be faced with like, why are we here, and why am I potentially being triggered by what's going on? And of course, it's not to say that will always happen if we start to become addicted to temples, but somewhere in our life, as we know, when we do get into phases of addiction in whatever context that is, there is a point where life starts to shout at us a little bit of like, okay, we're getting a little like shake from God of like, okay, we need to look at something. And I think that would be the temple.
Beautiful. No, thank you for sharing that, because that was coming up for me as well, you know, around like how beautiful and expansive the space was. And I love what you've spoken to in regards to how important integration is, and actually that being like a core part of the experience. And even you know, just to speak to the work that I do briefly, but you know, you have these men's work containers, and we say, hey, look, the work starts when you leave that door. Like it's great that we can sit in circle as brothers and do this work and feel great, open our hearts up. I was like, bro, like how you turn up this evening and this next period of your life is about what the medicine is from you having this experience with the being in circle, you know. And we always say like, you want to go integrate, go do the dishes, go clean your house when you get home, go do the difficult thing, you know. Don't feel like you need to like go all warrior on life and change your job and change your relationships. It's like, go do the difficult stuff that you're hiding from, because fundamentally that's where the work is. And that's in regards to the men's work container. So I'm wondering, in regards to this kind of like sacred sexuality temple tantric container, what are some practices that like people can do, whether you've gone to a temple, and also asking this for myself, whether you've gone to a temple or you're curious to explore what that might mean, how can we invite that into our daily life?
And I think this is such a key question, and something that it had been coming a few times during our conversation of like, being in a tantric energy is a daily practice. You know, it is it infiltrates, it ripples out into every aspect of our life. And for me, this is where I really feel the communication tools that we learn in Tantra are some of the most key things that I have taken from that. It's, you know, the beautiful lovemaking for hours and things that people see as Tantra of like, yes, that's beautiful, but how can we communicate with more authenticity? How can we speak our truth with clarity and directness? How can we receive the truth of others without going into judgment, or be in a space like you were talking about, you walked into the space and there was judgment about what other people were doing. Like, how can we walk that path in life? How can we observe something going on that would normally bring us into judgment, bring us into criticism, but actually be like, okay, this is in me, this is what's coming up. And there's some beautiful frameworks that give context for this. Like, I talk a lot about intentions, fears, and boundaries. And they're like three topics in which you can approach any conversation with any person. Something that's going to be deep and meaningful. It can be in a work context with a business colleague. Like, we're going into a new facilitator partnership. Like, my intention is that we feel supported. We feel that the work is split evenly, that there's balance, that we can communicate. My desire is that, my boundary is that after 7 o'clock at night, I'm not available. So you're welcome to email me at that point, but I'm not going to reply until the following day. And what one haven't I done intentions to? And my fear is that I'm very assertive, and I get stuff done when I have the energy to do that. But my fear is sometimes that means I do more than my fair share. So this is a way you can bring these like really practical tools into everyday life. You know, and if we were having an intimate connection, that conversation would obviously be very different than talking about stuff like that. But you can see how they are very, very practical and really useful falls. Like those three like questions are I've used in so many different scenarios. With family, also, if your family is receptive to having conversations like that, like mine has not been so far, but it would be nice if they would if they were.
Yeah, that's so. My sister keeps reminding me that life's not a ceremony, yet she's moving more towards the medicine woman path than I think she realizes, and that's her own journey. But it's definitely like how important that is. You know, let's just revisit those three questions. I think they're really
Yeah.
potent. Do you want to just say them clear in order?
Yeah. So
They sort of like latch
intentions or
onto them.
desires, they could be the same. Fears. Yeah.
So, what are my intentions and
Fear.
desires in
What are
this?
my
Yeah.
fears and my boundaries?
Intentions, desires,
Yeah.
fears, and boundaries. That is such a
Mm-hmm.
beautiful framework for any form of relationship, and whether it's, you know, business or romantic. And I guess the question is as well, so what's coming up for me is, you know, how soon in a relationship do you kind of bring that? And I
Mm-hmm.
think what I'm learning, and actually I've got maybe even answered my own question, but I'd love to hear your perspective on it. It's like when starting a new relationship, like, you know, at what point do you start to say, hey, look, like these are my intentions, and maybe this is a catch-22 question, but what are my intentions, what are my fears, and what are my boundaries? I feel I know the
Honestly,
answer, but I just want to get your two
some of the
cents
most
on that.
powerful and profound like relationships I've had have been having this conversation at the very beginning. When you have clarity of like what someone's looking for and what you know that you want, if at the beginning you can see there's not a mismatch, then why would you continue? You know, the reason why we continue when we know that there's something that doesn't really align with what it is that we also desire is through projection. Like as a woman, I've definitely been in a space where, okay, they've told me they don't want a relationship, but you know, after time, they're going to want that. Like, why am I not listening to what that person's telling me? You know, I'm listening, I'm putting it through my own projections, and then I'm taking action based on that. Like, how much more simple would life be if I listened to their truth and were like, okay, well, actually, right now I am looking for a relationship, and I hear that you don't want that, and I'm actually not available for casual hookups. So let's just send each other a lot of love and move on. Hey, like let's save that heartbreak.
Mm,
Yeah.
that
Oh
takes
yeah.
power and courage. And that is so beautiful. That's so beautiful. It's a conversation I was having not too long ago about how important that is, you know, and how actually I've recognized shadows in both myself. I've recognized shadows in myself where it's like, oh, we'll just keep them there because that makes me feel a bit good and I won't really be clear with it. It takes a strong man and a strong woman to say, actually, this is what I want. And if we can't be met on that, then
Totally.
let's part ways, you know. And that's also this abundance mindset, you know, because the lack says, I'm scared, I want
Mm-hmm.
this, I need this, even if it's not what I want, I will be here. You know, abundance goes, I'm gonna say exactly what I want, I'm gonna make that clear, and if that's not there, halas, we move
And I think
on, you know, like it is
part
what
of
it
that
is.
also is for us to be able to have that power to do that, we have to be clear with what we want. It's not always easy to know what it is we want, and we have to do some work to get to that point. You know, there is some soul searching to really identify the qualities that we have in our life, our morals, our the things in relating that are non-negotiables. You know, we have to actually sit, be present, take time to do that work. So if we haven't done that, we're not going to be in a position to meet this person having those conversations, you know, intentions, fears, and boundaries, because it's not coming from a place of truth and trust and clarity within ourselves.
So important, and that's so beautiful, well rounded, and it really feels like, you know, the some of the key takeaways here is just that importance of presence with yourself, presence with others, the importance of intention, the intention that we have going into things, you know, being honest with where we're at, being honest with what we want, and that as maybe as uncomfortable as uncomfortable as
Yeah,
that may be at the get-go, it's like that
so
could save
much.
a lot of pain later, you know. So I like this idea around like I used to kind of reflect on it. Sometimes holding on to a rose with big thorns can be quite painful, but it looks pretty, but the cuts are getting deeper.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we need to let go, and that might be painful at first, but that's the only way that we can heal, you know. So we have so many roses in our lives. So asking the question, where do we need to let go? Because it's being painful. And actually, sometimes we need to have the courage to let go in order to heal and move forward. So Arktara, I'm wanting us just to summarize a few things, and so it'd be lovely just for you to just share some of your key things that, you know, we've spoken about, just to kind of remind and revisit them before we close this space.
So I think what is Tantra? You know, that's one summary. Or what is sacred sexuality, or what is sacred sex, was the question that we first asked ourselves, right? And I think the things there are, like we talked about, presence, intimacy, slowing down also is something maybe we didn't touch on, but that's also really important. It's not rushing through things, because if we want to have this presence, if we want to feel where our body is and where our energy is, we have to be able to be slow enough to do that and not in our heads. So yeah, that's Tantra. I think the tools in which we can take, that we can use from in temple space, and the experiences that we have in temple space, and how we can implement them on our lives, are things like these intention spheres and boundaries, those three tools, integrating the work that we're doing, that, as we spoke about, that comes from whether it's men's work, plant medicine, women's work, Tantra, sexuality, breath, you know, any of these transformational modalities, like integration is the key to those.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. It's been such a beautiful journey, not only to connect with you and learn more about your journey as well, and just allowing our relationship, and I'm really naming and grateful because you've really supported me in this journey, you know. And I think I spoke to it before, but just saying it out loud, you know, I don't know if I would have got to that place where I felt comfortable enough to walk into a temple space, which led to one of the most profound experiences of my life, if I hadn't had the support from yourself and the clarity and just the energy that you brought, and allowing me just to feel grounded. So yeah, really thank you so much. It's been it's been a real beautiful journey. So Arktara, just the last couple moments just to speak to, how can people get in touch with you? How can people connect with your work if they're interested, just to dive deeper? And just
there's a couple ways. So I'm on Facebook and Instagram as Arktara. You can reach out on there. Also have a website, arktara.com. Most of my work at the moment is either in person in Ibiza or online. So there's two ways in which you can work with me. So yeah, reach out. And like I said at the beginning, my main focuses modalities at the moment is intimacy in cacao. So going deeper into the heart, deeper into ourselves through those practices.
That's so beautiful, and that sounds like a great topic of conversation for next time. Cacao medicina. Absolute beauty. Well, so much love to you, sister. Appreciate you. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your presence.
Such a beautiful synchronicity.
It's so lovely.
Yeah, amazing.
Absolute pleasure. Hey, take care, my love, okay? Thank you everyone as well for tuning in.